Canada just banned U.S. markets and signed a 0% tariff trade deal with the EU. Canada just decided to ban the U.S. market as Trump throws another economic tantrum, pushing pointless tariffs. Instead, Canada is shifting to Europe at a 0% tariff rate, proving that at least some leaders still have common sense.
It would be better for Canada to be the 28th EU member.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is spiraling into its own mess, completely self-inflicted.
Canada's leaders are apparently rethinking their ties to the United States. They're turning to another partner, also targeted by Trump's tariffs, an ally on the other side of the Atlantic, the European Union.
Canada finally decided to dump the U.S. like a toxic ex and move on to something way better. 0% tariff trade with the EU. And guess what? The U.S. is losing its mind. For decades, 80% of Canada's exports went straight to the U.S. It was like an unhealthy relationship where Canada kept giving and the U.S. kept taking. But now the tables have turned and the U.S. is panicking harder than a broke gambler at a Vegas casino.
I want to speak directly to Americans, our closest friends and neighbors. This is a choice that, yes, will harm Canadians, but beyond that, it will have real consequences for you, the American people.
The final straw? Donald Trump's latest economic tantrum. This guy just can't stop slapping tariffs on Canada like it's some kind of personal vendetta. Starting March 12, 2025, Trump is hitting all Canadian imports with a 25% tariff. That's right, everything. He's also going after steel and aluminum in April and trying to destroy Canada's $80 billion auto industry. Because apparently making life miserable for U.S. consumers is part of the America First strategy.
As I have consistently said, tariffs against Canada will put your jobs at risk, potentially shutting down American auto assembly plants and other manufacturing facilities.
And speaking of U.S. consumers, good luck affording a new car. Thanks to Trump's tariffs, Americans will have to pay an extra $1,000 to $3,000 per vehicle. Imagine walking into a dealership and realizing that your new Ford just got a Trump tax added to it. What a genius economic plan. But the best part? Trump actually thinks Canada can't survive without the US. He literally said, "Without us, Canada can't make it." Wow, the level of delusion is off the charts. As if Canada hasn't already been securing massive deals with the EU and Asia for years.
If President Trump wants to usher in a new golden age for the United States, the better path is to partner with Canada, not to punish us.
So how is Canada responding? By flipping the script completely. If the US wants to act like a jealous ex, Canada will simply move on to a new, better trade partner, Europe. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, trade between Canada and the EU has skyrocketed by 66% since 2017. That's right. While Trump was busy tweeting nonsense at 3 a.m., Canada was securing multi-billion-dollar deals with a stable, intelligent economic bloc. And let's talk numbers, because facts don't lie, even though Trump does. Canadian exports to the EU jumped 46% in just a few years.
Canada should join the EU. Europe needs space and resources. Canada needs people. Let's deal.
LNG, liquefied natural gas, exports are set to explode now that Europe has cut Russia off completely. Canada is investing $40 billion in the LNG Canada project in British Columbia, which will start exporting 1.8 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day by mid-2025. And guess what? If Canada doubles its LNG output, it will become one of the world's top energy suppliers, without the US.
This is a moment for all of us to continue to stand together, and as friends and partners, that's exactly what we will always do.
Meanwhile, Europe is absolutely loving this shift. With Canada stepping in as a major LNG supplier, the EU is getting a trustworthy, stable trade partner instead of dealing with the chaos of US politics and Trump's ridiculous tariffs. It's like ditching a scammy landlord for a dream apartment with no rent hikes.
Which is, where does Canada see itself in its place in the world related to the United States and related to the European Union? It was very clear from Trudeau's arrival here in Brussels that they feel very warmly towards the EU.
But wait, it gets even worse for the US, because Asia is also getting in on the action. Japan's LNG demand is expected to rise by 10%, reaching 74 million metric tons by 2040. Guess who's going to be supplying that energy? Not the US, but Canada. China is already importing 240,000 barrels of Canadian crude oil per day. Instead of relying on unpredictable American exports, China is now looking to Canada as a stable energy partner.
Reflecting very much upon the nature of our relationship with our largest trading partner, I mean, it's important to understand that Canada exports something north of 75% of our goods and services to our neighbor to the south.
So while Trump is busy burning bridges, Canada is out here building pipelines and signing deals. The world isn't waiting for America to get its act together. It's moving forward, and Canada is leading the way. And let's be honest, the US needs Canada way more than Canada needs the US. Trump can throw all the tariffs he wants, but in the end, it's American businesses and consumers who are going to suffer.
They will raise costs for you, including food at the grocery stores and gas at the pump. They will impede your access to an affordable supply of vital goods crucial for US security.
So what happens next? Will the US finally realize that bullying Canada was a terrible idea? Or will Trump double down on his economic stupidity and push the US into an even bigger crisis? One thing's for sure, Canada isn't looking back. First up, the energy crisis. The US has been sponging off Canadian energy for decades, relying on Canada for 99% of its natural gas imports. That's right. Almost every cubic foot of gas that keeps American homes warm and businesses running comes from Canada. So now that Canada is turning off the tap and shipping LNG to the EU and Asia instead, what's the US plan? Pray? Dig for oil in their backyards? Because replacing that supply isn't going to be easy.
But this nation was formed in 1867 largely to avoid becoming annexed by the United States. So it's an integral part of Canadian identity to be not American.
And if you think gas prices in the US are bad now, just wait. With less Canadian LNG flowing in, expect energy costs to skyrocket, especially in winter when Americans will have to fight for scraps. And speaking of US dependence on Canada, let's talk about oil refineries. Most American refineries are designed to process heavy crude oil, the type Canada provides. Without that supply, US refineries will now have to import lower quality crude from elsewhere at much higher costs. Oh, and that energy independence dream the US keeps preaching about? Yeah, that's officially dead.
Musings by President Trump has caused an upsurge in Canadian nationalism, which is not part of the Canadian nature that much.
Now, let's move on to the auto industry, because things are about to get even worse. Canada supplies engines, transmissions, and raw materials to US automakers. With that supply chain falling apart thanks to Trump's genius-level tariffs, car production is about to get a whole lot more expensive. And who's going to pay for that? Americans. Brace yourselves, US car buyers, because thanks to this trade war mess, vehicle prices are expected to jump by $3,000. Imagine walking into a dealership and realizing your dream car now costs as much as a small house in Texas. All because Trump decided to throw a fit over trade.
Americans are benevolently ignorant of Canada, whereas Canadians are malevolently knowledgeable about the United States. So it's a complicated relationship.
But wait, there's more. While the US economy is busy self-destructing, Canada is securing the bag elsewhere. The Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion, TMX, is about to triple Canadian oil exports to Asia, which means China, Japan, and South Korea will now get 890,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Translation: US refineries can kiss that Canadian supply goodbye. While American oil companies are scrambling to figure out how to replace that supply, Canada is cashing in on massive trade deals with Asia. Who's winning here? Not the US, that's for sure.
Canada, living next to the United States, is like sleeping next to an elephant, in which you feel every twitch and shudder on the elephant's part, no matter how well-meaning it might be. And there's certainly a lot of question right now about how well-meaning the elephant is towards its smaller neighbor.
And speaking of winners and losers, let's talk about who's taking control of the global economy. First up, China. While the US is busy self-sabotaging with its ridiculous trade policies, China is tightening its grip on critical minerals. Right now, China controls 90% of the world's lithium, cobalt, and nickel supply. You know, the stuff that's essential for electric cars, batteries, and pretty much the entire tech industry. The US is already behind in this race, but Canada and the EU aren't taking any chances. They're forming a strategic minerals alliance to cut China's monopoly and secure an independent supply chain. While the US government is still debating whether climate change is real, Canada and the EU are locking in deals to dominate the next generation of energy resources.
The European Union, because they're already basically aligned. And Canada, because it is pretty democratically aligned with how most European countries work, would actually probably get swift access.
Now, how will America respond? Probably in the dumbest way possible. So, let's be clear. This entire trade war is backfiring spectacularly on the US. If Trump thought Canada was going to beg for mercy, he was dead wrong. Instead of crawling back to the US, Canada is making long-term gains by cutting out an unstable, tariff-happy trade partner. And then there's China. Guys, China is watching this disaster unfold and getting ready to exploit the cracks in US-Canada trade. The longer the US keeps up this trade war, the more China benefits by filling in the gaps. So, at this point, the real question isn't whether this is just a trade war. It's whether we're watching the full economic divorce between Canada and the US unfold right before our eyes. And honestly, Canada is walking away with the prenup and a better future. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the biggest global economic shifts.